All right, welcome to the Messengers Podcast. This is Chris Searles.
Rob Seifert.
And today we are talking about the basics of print buying, or print buying for dummies, I guess. We see a lot. Obviously, one of the biggest things we do here is commercial printing, or maybe that's not obvious. I don't know how many people actually know our business that well, but we definitely see a change in the sophistication level, I guess, of print buyers that's occurred over the last 15, 20 years. I think it used to be you'd come out and a primary portion of your education, if you're going to go into marketing or advertising, was in print, right? Because that was where most of your marketing and advertising was going to go, or at least a good portion of it. So you had to kind of learn that pretty quickly, how to buy print and who to deal with and who to call. The days of print brokers really are kind of gone, where you had a lot of people that dealt with brokers, and the broker knew exactly which company to turn to based on what you were trying to produce and what equipment that company had. And a lot of that's gone. I mean, we don't deal with anybody under the age of 40 or so that deals with a print broker. And so a lot of that now comes down to people who don't have the education in the sophistication level, I guess, in the print buying process that used to just kind of be necessary, because a lot of it is growing up and learning a lot more of the digital side of things. So, one of the first questions I always get is when we ask for, somebody comes and they say, I want to print something, and we say, okay, what stock is it going to print on? They don't even know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah. Stock is it can be simplified, really, if you're talking about basic print projects.
Well, first of all, what is a stock?
Well, stock is the paper you're going to print on.
There you go.
So, just jumping back for a second to what you were talking about, I deal with a lot of clients that have turnover, interns coming into new positions in the marketing departments for non-for-profits and other organizations. And they're really not savvy about this whatsoever. So it's a constant explanation from this point. What is stock? Stock is paper. Now, even if they understand that point, they don't know the difference between, say, a cover stock and a text weight stock. Weight is one consideration. I always relate cover stock to something that you would get like a postcard or a trifold brochure. Those are typically printed on cover weight stocks. Something we keep in-house here is a 100-pound cover. Then the other stock would be a text weight stock. That's something comparable to copy paper, just so they understand it. And there are variable weights in between, but in general, that's a good enough explanation, and we can make recommendations.
And the weight is something that tends to throw people off, because that's what we deal with all day long. We deal with a 60-pound text or a 100-pound coated cover.
Right.
And most of the time, the only exposure that I find that most people have to weights is in bond weights.
Right.
And a bond weight is completely different than a text weight or, a cover weight. So a lot of times they're going to look, and we see it a lot where somebody says, I want a 24-pound. We don't really deal in bond weights. We usually would deal in a text weight or a cover weight. But we know, obviously when somebody's looking for a 24-pound, they're talking about a 24-pound bond.
Sure.
And not, because, you can't even get a 24-pound text sheet. It would be non-existent.
There's a little bit of translation there, for sure. Right.
So a lot of that is kind of first trying to know, what do you want it printed on? And really, I think the basics of that are, we can help. When we get something like that, it's always easy to kind of try to translate. If you have an example, a sample is always the best. If you say, look, this is what I want, it's easy for that. But we can usually help and kind of nail it down to exactly what we're going to print it on. But to kind of have an idea of, do you want it on an offset sheet, which would be like an uncoated, stock, or a glossy sheet, a coated, something that's shiny and glossy. Obviously there are a lot of different options, linens and, all kinds of stuff in there, but at least have some basic understanding of how thick you want it to be. Do you want it on something that's got a glossy,
Right.
coat to it, or something that's completely uncoated? It's got a little more texture to it. We see that has been a lot more of the trend, I think, over the past few years has been to go uncoated, to go on something that's offset and
Right.
has a little more feel to it, less shine. Um,
Especially with digital printing too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another variable. But like you said, we'll make recommendations based on the client and their type of business. I mean, some businesses lend themselves to a more, I would call it a commercial look on a nice high gloss stock, and other companies are more of a natural type look that they need, and that's the idea they want to communicate, and we'll recommend that.
Yeah.
So
And if you don't know, we always try to, because we do a lot of really all of our quotes, we do completely custom. So, the idea is, if you don't know, give some parameters, something where if you have an example of something that you want, but if cost is a huge factor, obviously there are papers that you can buy that are going to be a lot cheaper. If you're really going for a high-end look and you want a premium product or a premium feel, then make sure you convey that when you're actually talking to whoever's going to do the work for you, because they can make recommendations and they can help with that. But, it always helps to have some sort of a guideline so we know what we're working with before we make a recommendation.
yeah, certainly.
Color, I think, is always another thing that throws people off. Most people are used to, well, if I print something in color on my printer at home,
Right.
it comes out in color. If I print it in black and white, it comes in black and white. Obviously, when you deal with a print shop and a print house, color has a little bit more specific take.
Right.
We can do 1 color work, 2 color work, 3 color work, and then 4 color work, which always kind of throws people off that's full color. You go from 3 color, which is literally 3 colors on a sheet, to 4 color work, which is
Right.
every color.
Well, if this is if we're talking about the basics, usually I try to narrow it down to whether they want to print the job as a 1 color job or a 4 color job. Like you said, we can get into the other variables with PMS inks, but that's kind of customization. So if we're talking about the basics, usually for pricing, I would narrow it down to: are you printing this in color, or do you just want it in black and white?
Yeah. And I think, I guess, again, for beginners, people who are not sophisticated print buyers, the rule of thumb would be the more color you want, the more expensive the job is going to be. That obviously has some caveats, and
Right.
there are a lot of different factors that go into that. But in general, if you want 4 color work, it's going to be more expensive. It's got to run on a bigger press. We have to put more
Right.
ink onto it. More electricity. The press takes up more space, and it's just going to cost more. Where a 1 color job obviously is going to be on the lower end of the spectrum. So again, I always kind of relate it back to convey what the purpose is.
Right.
Is this a down and dirty? We just it's an instruction sheet that's going into a product that we're putting out there, and it just needs to be there, and it needs to be a part of it, and do it as cheap as possible? Or
Right.
is this something that is going to somebody you're trying to sell a $50,000 job to,
Yeah.
and you really want to convey the quality of what you do and do that through a print piece? Then we're gonna have to spend a little more money and put a little more into it.
Right. Well, that kind of touches on the point of the 2 other variables that I would probably say are the most important, which is the format that you have to decide on, and quantity. If you have a sense of the stock and the inks, I mean, these are the next 2 most important things that you need to consider. But again, format can be consulted upon. We can help with format. If you have an idea that you want to do a brochure, but you don't know if you want to do several pages in it, or a fold out, or a booklet, we can help with recommendations in terms of size and folds and format.
Well, format's important too. I mean, that's a long conversation, right? Because your format can, there's everything. But again, I think what it comes down to when you're looking at kind of the basics of how I just want to get something done, right? And this is, I have a new business, I have a startup, or I've just never done any print before, and I want to get a direct mail piece out because I want to drum up some business in my local area. What am I going to do? What am I going to send? How big is it going to be? there are a lot of factors that go into that, and that's again where I think it helps to come in with an idea of what you want to do, and then to work with somebody that can really help you through the specifics, whether it's somebody like us where if it's a direct mail piece and we know that, well, at a certain size, yeah, you might want to do it that way, but you're going to have to pay double for postage just because of the size that it is, and that's might maybe not be in your budget. To have an idea of all of those factors, whether it's something that's going to be budget conscious and budget focused, if it's something that just needs to make an impact and you're going to, send it out and get it out any way you can in a way that's just going to blow people away and it's going to be different than anything that's in there. But that's the idea that you got to kind of come in with, at least with, here's what I'm thinking, and maybe be open to working with somebody that's going to help and kind of walk you through that, as long as you know what the purpose of the piece is.
Right. And be flexible, in terms of, the size, because we can come up with recommendations on sizes that are going to save you costs on printing too. How many pieces will fit up on a sheet, will maximize the amount of brochures you're going to get, on the same press run. So those are services we offer too. But
I think flexibility is kind of an important point there too.
Right.
Where to have something, we know our equipment, we know our production process, we know the way that we can buy paper most efficiently. We know. So a lot of times there are ways that we can actually deliver a better product at a lower price, as long as there's some flexibility from a client to say, well, yeah, I had an idea, I wanted it to be this size or this many pages or this format, but with the ability for us to kind of go back and say, yeah, that's what you were looking for, but we can do this way,
right,
and it's going to stand out a lot more. It's going to, and it really comes back to goals. What is the goal of the piece? So if it's something you want to stand out, if it's something you want to draw some attention, and we can go back and say, look, the paper that you picked, we can't buy it at a size that's efficient to print your job or whatever that variable might be.
right,
But to be able to then just say, but here's what we can do, and here's a way that we can do this job. Change your format a little bit, maybe change your page count or change the way that it's bound, or
right,
any number of those things that we can do to be able to say, now we can do something that really is going to stand out. Maybe it'll cost a little more, maybe a little less, maybe it'll be about the same price, but at least the flexibility, coming in knowing what your goal is, what your objective is, and then allowing somebody that is knowledgeable in that process to help kind of walk you through it.
right, and probably the most difficult decision I come across dealing with clients that are either first-time print buyers or new to a company is deciding on a quantity. The first thing I'm going to ask them, if they can't decide on a quantity, is how is it going to be distributed? Whether it's direct mail or their handouts at their counter or rack cards for displays, it depends on where they're going to be distributed. So, we can help decide quantity if you have a general sense of how you're going to distribute these promotional pieces.
And I think that's one of the areas that we see often, that there seems to be a lot of uncertainty. And it confuses us a lot of times because it's kind of hard for us to understand how you don't know how many of a thing that you need.
Right.
But we also understand the other side of it, right? If it's something that's going into packaging if it's a new business or a new product and you don't know how many you're going to sell, you don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah, it's tough. It's almost as tough as a client trying to figure out their budget.
Yeah.
That's an even harder task.
That's a whole other podcast episode, I think. But the quantity thing, I think that what a lot of people forget to realize about the print production process is it's a manufacturing process, right? So like anything else, there's setup time and make ready time, and all of that is factored into your price. And that stuff doesn't change if you're doing 1,000 or you're doing 100,000 of something. Those costs basically are what they are.
Right.
And everybody that doesn't really have an idea of quantity always wants, well, just what's my price per piece going to be? And what they don't realize is that price per piece is going to change based on what that finished quantity is. If you do 10,000 of whatever, your price per piece might be X, but if you're going to do 100,000 of them, your price per piece is going to obviously go down significantly because we can be more efficient in the way we produce at that quantity.
Yeah, it's a common misconception. I'll quote a project and it'll be based on printing 5,000 pieces, and then the client will come back and say, let's print 2,500, and their assumption is it's half the cost.
Right.
And it's not half the cost.
Right.
Because
And
of
that
the
even
startup fee. Yeah.
and even depending on what you have built into that price, if there's artwork built into that price, if there's, but everything is based on quantity. Quantity is one of the most important factors, and we do see that a lot, that there's not an understanding, and or we get the other side of it where they want 10 different quantities priced out, not realizing that it takes a little bit of time to do that stuff, and you can get a pretty good understanding if you're not sure from 1,000 to 10,000 how many you're going to do, and that happens. It seems like a big variation, but it does happen. Price 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000, and you can pretty much interpret, extrapolate the cost of breaks in between there to a reasonable extent without going crazy and needing to know every penny of what it's going to cost to do 7,800.
Right. Yeah, I think in general, those are the basic points of information you need from a client to begin talking about a quote. If they could come to you with that type of understanding, they know they have a sense of the type of stock they want to print on, the inks that they're going to be using, the format that they're considering, and the quantity that they need to print. Then we can talk about the finer points of it in terms of specialty finishing, binding, whatever else we need to do.
And I always go back to goals, right? What does it need to do for you? Because if you're working with the right partner, they'll work with you to make sure that it's going to accomplish that goal. So if you need something to stand out, you might have to spend a little more. And coming in and saying, well, we want a really high quality piece, but at the lowest price possible.
Right.
You got to kind of decide between those two things. You have to know what really the goal is, and if you have any special considerations in terms of it needs to fit in this or it needs to go in, bring that with you. Come in with an idea and understanding of all those things, but be flexible if you can be flexible.
Right. Just another thing I come across a little quite often is, and I'm constantly trying to express it to clients, is comparing apples to apples. And I'm sure everybody's heard the expression, but it can be a frustration when you're speccing out a job and you're getting all this information from them, and they're comparing it to other prices, and they don't understand the differences between these variables we're talking about as far as stocks and inks, and you try to be as specific as you can so that the quote is as accurate as possible, and they end up going with another client because the job is completely different than you quoted.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it happens a lot where sometimes you got to make assumptions. You got to fill in the gaps and fill in the holes because you can't keep going back to a client, hey, you didn't let us know about this variable or that, or whatever else was unanswered that we had to kind of fill in, and we may not even know that they're getting other prices. That we have done a lot of work and put in a lot of time and kind of expect that we're who they are dealing with, and all of a sudden they come back and say, this person was going to do it cheaper, and you look at it and go, but that's not on the stock that we talked about. It's not anywhere near the job that we talked about, because you said these things were important to you. You said quality was a factor, and that was something you wanted to do. So we put it on a nicer stock, or we did X, Y, and Z to make sure that you were going to get what you said you wanted.
Right.
But now all of a sudden it's just you went someplace else because it's cheaper. But we would have been cheaper if we did what they said they're gonna do for you also.
Right. And then there's the other side of that too, where we get a job, and then we'll do a design, and to save cost, it was quoted without bleed, and that's going to add to
Bleed's a good
cost.
one to explain.
Well, that's something. Bleed is something that's a common question I have from clients. What bleed is?
We always have to ask, and they always ask back, "What is that?"
Right. Yeah.
So why don't you explain that?
New times. Well, bleed is an allowance on a printed sheet for trim, meaning that you need excess area of ink coverage, just about 1/8 of an inch. That's our standard bleed amount beyond the trim size on a book.
which would be the finished final size.
Right. The trim size is the cut size. So if you're doing an 8.5, 11 book, your bleed, your ink would have to print an eighth of an inch beyond that on all sides of the piece, of the finished piece. And then just, these are terms, bleed and safety. Safety is another one. Has to do with the trim size too. When you're trimming large quantities of books, it's accurate but not perfect. So we always recommend a 1/4 inch safety, which would mean to keep critical text and information, things you don't want trimmed off of your marketing piece, to be within a 1/4 inch of the trim size. So that's really the definition of bleed and trim.
And that kind of goes to another issue that we see sometimes, or saving when a client really wants to go and save some money on design, and they go to a graphic designer that has no experience in print design, and they don't know those things. And we get,
Right.
We get information, stuff that's critical, a phone number that is right up next to the edge of the piece, because it looks nice where it is, and it,
Right.
if you're looking at it on a computer screen, it looks great, and that's all well and good. But then as soon as you go and put that 10,000 of those, stack them up and put them on a cutter and try to
Right.
cut all those right exactly on that line every single time, it's just never going to happen. You're always going to have a little bit of variation there. So it goes with working with a designer, a graphic designer that's experienced in print production too.
Yeah.
Is always a good starting point as well.
Yeah, it's a common issue. We do a lot of print that is sent in from the outside, and if it's not set up properly, the clients have issues after, and it stems from dealing with people that don't truly understand design for print. And there's a lot of it out there now. There's a lot of people that are working out of their homes, trying to make ends meet, working remotely, and they understand how to use software programs, but they don't understand print specifications. So you end up kind of having to pay to have something designed twice.
Yeah.
Because it's designed the first time, and
then
we're unable to print it.
Yeah. And then you pay just as much to get it fixed as you would have paid by just dealing with somebody that knew what they were doing in the first place. That
Right.
doesn't mean that anybody that's working out of their home doesn't know what they're doing or how to set it up, but make sure that it's somebody that has experience designing for print, not somebody that just kind of knows how to make something look nice in Illustrator.
Important. You could just, if you're dealing with a designer outside, if you ask them if they understand bleed and safety, even though you may not completely, it's a good question.
Yeah. So again, I think just kind of wrap up, have an idea of what your goal is, right? What you want the piece to accomplish. What are you trying to do? How's it going to be distributed?
Yeah.
How many, generally speaking, do you need? You can fill in the blanks yourself kind of from there. Size, format, color, and whether or not you're looking to really goals. What does it need to do for you? Is it utilitarian? Does it need to be kind of down and dirty, as cheap as possible? Is it a brand piece that really needs to convey some quality? And if you can come in with those things, then we can pretty much send you on your way with something that's going to work for you.
Happy to help you.